our committee today. But before we start with the minister and the officials, I would ask the committee to, if they wish to adopt the report of the steering committee.
Ms. Collins has her hand up.
Yeah, Ms. Collins, I think I know what you're. Can you give me a second? I think I'll get to you in a minute. Yeah. So I would just say that if we adopt the report of the steering committee, in the second hour we will not be looking at the. We will not be reviewing the report on the profits and emissions reduction efforts in Canada's oil and gas industry, because the subcommittee report stipulates that we're doing that on November 4th. So if we adopt the report as is, then we will not be studying that draft report in the second hour. So let's do that as a first step. Is there agreement to adopt the subcommittee report? I believe there is. Okay, adopted. And I believe Ms. Collins, you would like to propose something for the second hour.
Yeah, I was hoping to get unanimous consent from the committee, and I'm just realizing my headset just popped out, so the translation probably isn't working very well.
It sounds like it's working.
Okay, great. I was hoping to get unanimous consent from the committee to ask the officials to stay for the second hour.
Do we have unanimous consent? I think we do. Good. Okay, so we're off and running, and we can proceed now with hearing from our Minister of Emergency Preparedness. Minister, welcome to the committee, and welcome to the officials. It's nice to see you all again. Minister, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair, colleagues. Thank you for inviting me here today so I can appear before you. I know that honourable members and Canadians are seeking answers and want to hear about the events that unfolded in Jasper. I look forward to helping the committee members understand the Government of Canada's emergency preparedness efforts with respect to wildfire preparedness and management. And this year, Canadians witnessed more devastating destruction caused by wildfires. Over 5 million hectares were burned, and fires continue to burn across the country as we speak. This past summer, right across the country, we saw fires and floods followed by hail, and we are not done yet with an active hurricane season. So far in 2024, fires have burned twice the yearly average, and Canadians are feeling the impacts on their communities. And I can say that we left no stone unturned to get Canadians prepared for the wildfire season this year, and especially working with our provincial and territorial counterparts. Following the catastrophic season in 2023, we worked with all levels of government, NGOs, and private sector partners to prepare Canadians. As part of these efforts, I hosted roundtable discussions across the country with provincial, territorial, and municipal decision makers, with first responders and experts in the field. We talked about capacity building and maintaining our readiness response. We spoke about how to best prepare, but also how to mitigate. And we spoke about the need to better integrate Indigenous emergency management into our preparedness for planning. These conversations were critical in helping us strategize and coordinate this year's wildfire planning, response, and wildfire recovery. We ensured open communication with provinces and territories and Indigenous leaders, sharing forecasts in advance of the season and providing frequent updates as climate data became available to help form and share readiness and response across the country. As you are no doubt aware, the Government Operations Centre under Public Safety Canada is the lead for federal response coordination for emergency events. And throughout the wildfire season, the team worked nonstop to respond to emergencies in support of communities across the country. And that brings me to the tragic events that unfolded in Jasper. And frankly, the reason we are here today, to help the people themselves and the rebuilding that is happening. Now, Jasper is a special part of Canada, which we all can agree, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a place where nature and wildlife are safeguarded, a carbon sink, and a sacred land for Indigenous communities. But like anywhere in Canada, Jasper is not immune to the increased severity and frequency of climate change. We were monitoring the wildfire in Jasper and also in northern Alberta very closely. I was in daily contact with Minister Ellis from Alberta as well, and he was my counterpart there. And immediately following Jasper, the devastating fire, I toured the region with Premier Smith, Minister Ellis, and other members of her government, alongside with the Mayor of Jasper. Sadly, Mayor Ireland discovered that his home did not survive the fire, and this was his childhood home since the age of 2, and the home where he and his wife raised their 2 sons, and the home where he had lived for 67 years. Together, we all heard from the command leaders, and that included Parks Canada members, many who lost their own homes and possessions in Jasper. From the Calgary Heavy Urban Search and Rescue Team, from the fire chiefs. We heard from experts about what took place in Jasper. They described the wall of flames and the unpredictable wind conditions that led to the evacuation. 100 kilometers per hour winds with gusts up to 150 kilometers per hour launched pine cones and branches that were on fire into the town. There's no fire team, no matter how experienced, could stop its path. And here, I want to quote the Deputy Premier and Minister responsible for emergency preparedness, Minister Ellis. And quote, the actions first responders took saved lives of all communities. The preparation that the municipality, Parks Canada, and partners in the region took in advance, which helped save the majority of the town. The bravery and outstanding coordination in the ground. And I also want to take this opportunity to personally thank him and his efforts on working together to making sure that we had a very well-coordinated response. All orders of government stood with conviction and echoed this sentiment. When the wildfire threatened the municipality of Jasper in July, the federal government received and approved a request from the Alberta and for Canadian Armed Forces support. Approximately 25,000 community members were also evacuated. Over the course of 2024 wildfire season, we received 2 additional requests for federal assistance from Alberta, all in support of the community of Jasper. Federal support included wildland firefighting resources, humanitarian and logistic support, and assistance from the Canadian Armed Forces. Support from the humanitarian workforce included wildfire mitigation and hazard cleaning support from Team Rubicon. The Canadian Red Cross supported with the reception centers to help evacuees and shared donation matching fund with the government of Alberta to support their ongoing needs. The Salvation Army prepared daily meals to help first responders. In addition to federal assistance, 850 firefighters were deployed to Jasper from other regions of Alberta and from across the country. The collaborative spirit and shared commitment in Canada to manage our fires together is in many ways our greatest asset in the fight against climate change. We also called in additional resources from our international partners. Over 600 firefighters arrived in Alberta from Costa Rica, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, South Africa, and Mexico. And in Jasper, all orders of government and partners committed to being there for the residents, and we are doing just that. As of right now, the wildfire situation in Alberta is stable, and the response is being effectively managed at the provincial level. And although we are now on the other side, the peak of the summer temperatures, we must remain vigilant. We continue to work on emergency preparedness measures with all our partners to further strengthen our resilience in the future. We all know that we need to do more and collaborate more to ensure that we can safeguard communities from the increasingly active climate-driven hazards. So that is where we stand today, and I'm focused on the rebuild and working with our partners and how to prevent this from happening in another town in Canada. Again, this requires collaboration. It means having a real plan to fight climate change, because it is no longer a matter of if climate change will affect us. And normally we say, but when? But sadly, it is happening right now. And we're seeing this not only across our country, but around the globe. So it is my goal to create a more resilient and sustainable approach to emergency management that will help Canada prepare for, mitigate, respond to, and recover from disasters such as wildfires. And that is why our government developed the country's first national adaptation strategy to support a shared vision for a resilient Canada. This strategy recognizes that it will take a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approach to tackle climate change and extreme weather, and we are committed to continuing this important work to keep Canada safe. At a time where we need to come together to protect what we hold so dear in Canada, to protect communities, Canadians, and their businesses, plus their livelihood. Climate change is not just real. It is. It's causing our disasters, like what we have seen in Jasper. So in closing, I'd like to thank all emergency responders for their tireless efforts on the front lines and behind the scenes. And just a quick another message to all the firefighters, and I said this to them when I was in Jasper. Because of their efforts, they're the ones that actually saved Jasper, that allowed residents to move back in quickly and for the park to be open. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll open up to questions.
Thank you, Minister. We'll start the first round off with Mr. Soroka for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be sharing about the last 2 minutes with MP Mazur. Minister Guilbeault called the wildfire in Jasper a success. Yet a third of the town was destroyed, thousands are homeless, and nearly $1 billion in damage. Did his failure to implement proper mitigation go against your job to prepare for this emergency?
So what I can tell you is when I visited Jasper, the command center, and the town itself, alongside with the mayor, the premier, and our ministers, and especially Minister Ellis, the briefing that we got, if it wasn't for the preparation that Jasper had taken, the Fire Smart program that was conducted, more importantly, the training and the coordinated training that all the different agencies had done, I think just a few months prior, that led to not only saving the town, but making sure that the evacuation was very successful and done quickly.
Okay. The wildfire in Jasper was a disaster waiting to happen, with experts and officials raising alarms for over 8 years. When were you first informed, either by Minister Guilbeault or any other member of the Liberal government, that Jasper was a tinderbox ready to ignite? When and by whom?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't agree with that assessment. When you look at across the country, British Columbia, Alberta, the forecast that we were seeing with the extreme heat, there were many parts of the country that we know, because of the extreme heat, is prone to wildfires. When did I first know of the wildfire that took place? It was just actually, I believe, a few days before that the evacuation took place. When we were informed, well, one thing we always make sure through the Government Operations Center to making sure that all the resources are in place, and do they have all that was needed, and everything that we were told at that time, additional resources were being moved in, and that things were being held at that time until those gusts of wind that I was talking about that made the situation extremely worse, that never happened apparently in Jasper before.
But Minister, I think you're forgetting the fact that, the mountain pine beetle, there was a lot of dead trees. I'm not saying there wasn't fire smarting in town. Mm-hmm. The problem is the fire smarting wasn't done further back, like a mile or 2 miles. That's where the problem was. You had huge amounts of fuel sitting there, essentially dead trees that could ignite at any time. And yes, once that got fire started there, the problem was you were not going to stop it. That's our point, is why was those trees not removed? So, when and how were you informed that there should have been more done? So
as the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, my job is to look at responding to the emergency. What I'll tell you, what I was briefed upon when I was on the ground, I'll let Parks Canada and others explain further if they need to on this. When I was briefed is the fire smarting that actually took place, the wall of flame that was reported. If it wasn't for the fire smarting that was done, the wall of flame would have kept going. They actually would stop. It was because of those winds that had never taken place before, that 100 kilometers per hour, that gusted up to 150 kilometers per hour, that launched those pine cones that were on fire and branches into the town, that actually set the town on fire. But for everything that we were briefed on, that if it wasn't for the preparation that had taken place, that the situation would have been much worse.
Okay, I won't get into the severe winds in mountain areas, but I'll pass it on to MP Mazur.
Thank you. Minister, you're responsible for emergency preparedness. Do you agree with prescribed burns help prevent wildfires? Yes or no?
First, I'm not the expert on how to deal with that. That the experts would have to look at, because I have seen where certain places...
Minister, the question was pretty straightforward. Do you agree that prescribed burns help prevent wildfires? Yes or no?
It all depends on which area. Each expert, for example, in the Yukon,
Minister, I'll tell you, they do actually help. So, Minister, documents obtained by suggest that Minister Guilbeault's department was working against your mandate. A senior official at Parks Canada wrote in an email months before the Jasper wildfires, and I quote, "At what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel prescribed burns in Western Canada?" Then the official stated, and I quote, "Political perception may become more important than actual prescription windows." Minister, newly obtained emails now reveal that this discussion was so alarming, the Executive Director of Conservation replied, begging Parks Canada to put forest management above politics. And I quote, "I hope we don't get into a blanket shutdown," she said. Quote, "It is critical to continue those kind of burns. It is how they maintain the community fuel break, and when they fall behind, it is very difficult to catch up," end quote. So, Minister, when were you first informed that Minister Guilbeault's department was discussing cancelling prescribed burns because of political optics?
First of all, I think those questions were answered already earlier.
Je crois qu'on a déjà répondu à ces questions. Je vous posais la question à vous.
Minister, and any opportunity to respond to his question.
I'm sensitive to the badgering of witnesses. I don't think it's really that severe in Mr. Mazur's case. Go ahead. Wait.
Je crois qu'il y a un petit problème dans la
OK,
traduction.
est-ce que vous comprenez? Est-ce qu'on entend? C'est bon? OK, alors, Monsieur Mazur, continuez, là, mais donnez la chance.
Please continue. Please continue.
I'll ask you again, Minister. When were you first informed that Minister Guilbeault's department was discussing cancelling prescribed burns because of political optics?
I can only tell you what I have been briefed on when I visited Jasper. I
So
deal
you
with
were-
the emergency
were you aware?
response. I don't get into what takes place in each community across the country.
Were you
we
aware?
look at responding. No, I wasn't.
Thank you. How much time?
15 seconds. 10 seconds.
I'm good. Thank
OK, Madame Taylor-Roy.
Very much, and thank you to the Minister and the officials for being here again. Last meeting, we heard about the heroic efforts and the amount of coordination that was done. And we also heard from Mr. Landon, who was on the ground in Jasper. So you talked a lot about the collaboration and coordination. We heard about that last week as well. We also heard that the Alberta government had decided to reduce their firefighting budget by $30 million. Was that ever discussed, and did that have an impact? Because we heard that certain types of equipment weren't available that were there, and was there ever a conversation about the need to keep the budgets for firefighting increasing rather than decreasing?
What I can say that when it comes to Jasper or Alberta actually collaborates really well when it comes to not only wildfires but emergency management. In fact, actually, it's one of the things in emergency preparedness or especially when emergency is called. I've never had to deal with any partisan issues. Right? We deal with the emergency, work very closely together. I would have to say that my closest relationship is actually with Minister Ellis.
Right.
And that's why one of the reasons why when we were informed what was taking place, I decided to go to Edmonton and work with Minister Ellis and coordinate our resources directly. They made all resources available as quickly as possible, and I want to commend them for their efforts. The Premier was with us when we got that briefing, and I would have to say the briefing that we got, the preparation and the work that was done, it was actually far greater than any other place I've actually have witnessed. If it wasn't for the fire smarting, if it wasn't for the preparation, the training, the entire town could have been lost. They went into when I arrived, and the interesting part was it was Parks Canada folks. They had Canada Task Force 2. From Calgary that was there, and also Alberta Fire working very closely. Very direct questions were actually asked. In fact, everybody talked about how well not only the preparation was taking place, but I would say some members were talking about how they need to look at utilizing this in other parts of the province and even across the country.
Yeah. Thank you. That's fantastic to hear that collaboration was there and everyone worked so smoothly. I'm wondering, there was talk of certain equipment like water bombers not being available. I guess they're called water bombers or air tanker groups from either Alberta or British Columbia at that time. Would that have made a difference if they had been there, given the nature of the fire?
No, in fact, actually, water bombers were made available, and Derek, I think you can more. Derek runs the Government Operations Center, provide more details.
Okay.
Water bombers actually were made available,
Great.
but when we and everybody looks at it as why weren't they used? It's the incident commander on the ground has to take a look at when it's safe to do so. And when we visited, they clearly showed there was it would have been absolutely dangerous for them to be able to use the water bombers at that time. Helicopters that had night vision capability were also made available as well. But it's incident commander on the ground that has to make the decision. But Derek, if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, Derek Traherne, Government Operations Center. So the minister is correct. I mean, those decisions are made by the incident commander, and there was a unified command that was sort of set up there with the municipality and the province and parks as well. So they make those calls. There were no shortages of water bombers or equipment across the country this summer. We had a very significant fire season, which I'm happy to speak to at length, but there were no major gaps in availability of either firefighters or equipment. And we saw fires across the country, starting in the east and moving west, and then the west, and obviously got 60–70% of the fires this year. But Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, and others are some of the strongest emergency management agencies in the country and have significant assets at their disposal. So that's decisions that are made on the ground, but we never saw any shortages during the season.
And just one quick last question. On the question of the prescribed versus mechanical clearing, because I think that was the decision that was being discussed by the Minister of the Environment. I know everybody who was fighting or preparing lived in Jasper in the area. Would they have been involved in making those decisions about whether, I understand 1,700 hectares was cleared to do more, and whether it would be done through burns given the heat, or would it be done through mechanical clearing? Who would have made those decisions?
We go, for example, our focus was on the emergencies, making sure that the resources were there. Obviously, Parks Canada can explain, but I can tell you what the briefing that all of us received when we were on the ground. And especially what I looked at was also from Alberta Wildfire Service. They too were also there. And the preparation that was made was actually quite extensive, and that the situation would have been worse. And when it comes to managing of fire smarting, those are decisions that have to be made by a community. What is the best way? I'll give you an example. Controlled burns are done, but at the same time, in the Yukon, they've also have, through their preparation, they've actually mechanically have moved it and turned it into more of an economic opportunity. So each community has to decide how they want to do it. But let's not forget, the vegetation and what needs to grow and how it needs to be done is also dependent on each area across the country as well.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Madame Posé, thank you very much for being here with us today. It is very important to understand what unfolded to make sure it never happens again elsewhere. So this touches everyone. Public security, Mr. Minister, is your specialty, and henceforth, public security is facing multiple risks by the impacts of climate change, and you have referred to this in your opening remarks. We have before us devastation in an inhabited area and in no way sheltered for any future disasters that might happen. Thanks to our analysts, we have a document. We can also recall the presentation of Mr. John Pomeroy, an eminent academic and scientist who presented last February, and he said that the drought this year is alarming. So there is a 70% less covering compared to average, and then glaciers have had record melts, and the underground water has never been as low. In the Rockies, that you have 5 meters less water. The level of reservoirs are so low that municipalities can only transfer water by truck. Now, there's a good example of climate change. We've always said, well, it's a few years down the road. No, we're in the midst of it now. Now, if we add to these points the presence of parasites, because we have talked about the mountain pine beetle. Now, what kind of wiggle room, what can the department envisage for the coming years?
First of all, I mean, what I can tell you is that the mitigation and the fire smarting, that's done by other departments. My role is to respond to the emergency, but what I can tell you is when I would say the mayor of Jasper, who explained to us thoroughly, he goes, this is was the number one concern, and they have been working on this for decades. So the fire smarting that has been done is done very professionally, and everything that they could do was being done. When it comes to the pine beetles and the drought, we made it very clear from early on as we were giving updates, the forecasts that we were seeing, that it was going to be devastating, a very hot summer. In British Columbia, we dealt with the mountain pine beetle situation well before, and we've been dealing with a lot of these things. And sadly, in British Columbia, where I'm from, there's been a lot of wildfire situations that have been dealt with, and different fire smarting has been done there. Yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done across the country and working with the provinces and territories. But I can't give you the exact answer.
Merci beaucoup pour votre réponse.
We'll stop you here. Thanks for your answer. I just have two other questions. That's why I'm interrupting you. But in your opinion, what challenges did public security actually meet at Jasper? And what are the problems that we might try to avoid so that in future incident wouldn't be as serious?
So when we visited, and there's a deeper lessons learned going to be taking place on Jasper. The forecast of where the winds and where the fire would potentially come from, all the fire smarting was done. But what we were told is the winds were so high that they've never faced before, was the reason why that the pine cones and the tossed and on the ground itself, which people got to see alongside the premier, there were trees that were knocked over because of the wind. But what can we do? There's certain in this case in Jasper.
Yes. What are the successes during the operation, and what can be done to make improvements?
The best is always first of all is the preparation. What can you, if a fire was to come, how do you prepare for it? But in this case here, what we were told by the experts on the ground, that the fire itself was so enormous that there's nothing that could have been done at that time. Because of the climate change and the extreme winds that they have never seen before had that impact. So the only thing that you can do is, do you have a good evacuation plan? Do you have the right the preparation in place? All those things were being done. And so what needs to be done is saying, okay, if the wind patterns were different, what would they do in the case of the new preparation that they might have to face?
Alors, de la préparation que vous...
So, with the preparation that had been done, could one almost copy-paste and apply those to other regions in Canada? Have I understood you correctly?
Learn from one another, because each area is going to be very different. So, for example, the fire that took place in Enterprise in Northwest Territory was very different because a lot of the fire was actually going underground. West Kelowna was different. But Derek or anybody else who wants to add into this, because it's not my expertise. Or Trevor, you want to?
Well, okay. Preparations. I mean, at a macro level, there's a number of strategies in EM that Trevor can speak to as well. But for us, the preparation for this season began last year, right? And this has been the worst 5 years in emergency management.
Thank you. I have to stop you there, unfortunately. We'll go to Ms. Collins. Maybe Ms. Collins will let Mr. Treherne finish. I don't know. It's up to her. No pressure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with the minister. And we are in a climate emergency, and the Jasper fires highlight how this crisis is impacting everything that we hold dear. I have formative memories of my time in Jasper, visiting friends. We're working in tourism and hospitality there, hiking, just in complete awe of the beauty and the power of that place. And these events are happening more frequently. They're going to get more severe. The area burned in 2023 was more than 6 times the historical average. New Democrats have been calling for the establishment of a national firefighting force to deal with future wildfire emergencies. And in my province of BC, like in Alberta, we are dealing with multi-year droughts, which make wildfires even more likely. We wrote to you calling for a $1 billion watershed security fund. These two policies could protect watersheds, prevent disasters, tackle wildfires, and I'm curious why your government hasn't implemented them.
First of all, you're absolutely right. We do need to do more. It's how we do it and making sure that it's the appropriate action that we take. Because every single year we have been dealing with an increased severity, of wildfires, but also other emergencies. So first and foremost, what we wanted to do, the structure across Canada, how we manage emergencies, is based on majority of the resources, or it's managed through the provinces and territories. Then we as a federal government provide additional resources if resources have been exhausted. So the first thing what we've done here is adding additional firefighters, training of 1,000 firefighters, and also, what do you call it, supervisors? I forget the ones that actually command teams. The instant command. And the reason I say this is, so first and foremost, what we want to do is making sure that the additional resources are going, can be utilized immediately. The second piece of it is, we are looking at options at the federal level of what we need to do, but we want to make sure that it actually complements the work that's going to be happening on the ground, and that work is ongoing.
Minister, Minister, I think that given the urgency and the scale of the crisis that we face, kind of a wait and see attitude when it comes to addressing wildfire emergencies, implementing a national firefighting force, and protecting our watersheds is short-sighted. But I do want to ask you, over the past year, the residents of Fort Chipewyan have been raising the alarm that they still do not have a working dock or a way to safely escape the community in the case of a wildfire. And then today, the Athabasca Chipewyan, the Mikisew, and the Fort Chipewyan Métis Nations released a really shocking statement that they were shocked to learn that your government concealed the existence of a federally contaminated site around that dock. The Transport Canada dock, known locally as the Big Dock, is used to hunt, to trap. Local children learn to swim there. It is incredibly shocking and appalling that that information that there was a contaminated site there from 2017 was hidden from this community. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that and also speak to the fact that they need a way to escape if there's a wildfire.
Just to address your first question there, I just want to let you know we're not waiting. We're actually working with the provinces to making sure that the resources are there. To your other point that you have,
you've only got a
to your other point you raised is one is we work very closely with the other departments, especially Indigenous Services, on this. I'm not aware of the dog situation. Our team will take a look at it and see if our department has any the role that we need to play. But we will work with, and if we can get more information on this and get back to you.
Well, just so you know, in the spring, the community had been facing historically low water levels, and there are 3 wildfires that happened within 2 kilometers of the airport, and they have been asking your government to dredge the dock and to make sure there's emergency egress there, but the government refused, and now they found out from a third party that the reason is because there is a contaminated site that the community was unaware of, that the government did not disclose. This is appalling. It is, in my opinion, an example of environmental racism. And I hope that the government will connect with the community and be held accountable. This is completely unacceptable.
I think Andrew has some more information they can provide on this.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I was just up in Fort Chipewyan and met with both or all 3 of the Métis Nation of Fort Chipewyan, the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, and the Mikisew Cree First Nation. The minister was there with us. They did.
When you were there,
they did raise. Sorry, they did raise. They did raise the issue.
Monsieur le Président. Chair, with the translation. If there are interruptions and people speaking over each other, we can't get the translation. So we can continue.
Seconds of my time left. I just wanted to make sure that the official answered. They deserve answers. The contamination was withheld from them. If you met with them, if the government met with them very recently and did not disclose that, that feels even more appalling.
So we did discuss it when we were there, that there could be federal contamination, and we said we would look into it and have. But I think your other question was on evacuation routes, and there was a commitment made between ourselves, the Alberta government, just because you asked about could the dock be used for emergency. I'm just trying to answer that question, sorry. And we did say that an all-season road should be something that... Sorry,
if you just don't mind pausing on what you had said. The site was deemed contaminated as early as 2017, according to the statement from these three nations, that your government deemed it contaminated years ago. So...
Our time's up, unfortunately. We'll go to the second round, the 5-minute round, and it's Mr. Lloyd who's leading off.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Your experience with disasters, Minister, you're a former military man. I'd like to get your perspective, and I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd like to get a direct answer. Knowing what you know now about what happened in Jasper, was it a mistake for the government not to conduct more mechanical clearing operations and more prescribed burns to protect the town site of Jasper?
What I can tell you, and what I was briefed on the ground with the Premier and the Alberta Wildfire Service, that everything that could have been done was done. And I believe Mayor Ireland can attest to that.
I think you're avoiding the question here. I understand that Alberta Emergency Management of the town may have done everything they could have done in terms of fire smart, in terms of positioning emergency response equipment to react to a fire once it happened. But I'm asking about what happened before, in the years before the fire started, in the years since 2017 when Ken Hodges and other scientists warned your government that not taking action on mechanical clearing and prescribed burns to protect the town of Jasper was setting up the town of Jasper for a catastrophe. Knowing what you know now, Minister, and with your extensive experience, will you say whether or not it was a mistake for Parks Canada not to more extensively clear the forest and use prescribed burns to protect the town of Jasper?
The only thing I can tell you is what I have been briefed on when we were involved with the emergency, and what we were briefed on the ground with all the Alberta, from the Premier and other ministers, that everything that could have been done was done. In fact, if the preparation hadn't taken place, that the whole town could have been lost.
Well, Minister, we could have avoided the town being burned down at all if we had taken extensive action to clear the dead pine beetles that scientists warned your government needed to be cleared in order to prevent the fire in Jasper. I'm asking you, Minister, one last time. You saw it with your own eyes. You saw what happened. Are you not willing to admit that clearing more forest and using more prescribed burns could have prevented the town of Jasper from being burned down?
So what we do is we'll be going through a lessons learned to determine what are the lessons that we can learn to be able to apply not only for that area, but for also the rest of the country as well.
Minister, it's pretty shocking that you won't give a direct answer to that question, but I will move on to my next question.
Point of order?
Hold my time, please.
Yes, Ms.
Yeah, I just find the member opposite, is being, questioning the minister's integrity by repeating that
that's
question
not true,
and then
but that's
saying
not a point of order.
Questioning that again. And it's Standing Order 18, by the way.
It's not a point of order. It's not a point of order, but...
I appreciate the break, though. Thank you.
Okay, let's continue, but let's be respectful, I guess. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll move on to my next question, Minister. You did talk about a time of reflection, and I think that is important, but we need not just to reflect, we need to take action. I've been told by scientists and people on the ground that the town of Jasper is still at significant risk, particularly to the northwest of town where there still is significant stands of pine beetle-infested dead pine trees that pose a significant risk to the town. What is Parks Canada doing immediately to prepare the town of Jasper to face this risk so that we don't have a repeat of what we had this last summer?
So because I can only answer for my portfolio, what I can tell you is we have learned from whether it's Fort McMurray, West Kelowna, Enterprise, and we try to share those lessons. And we will be making sure that all the lessons that have been learned here will be applied not only to that area but for others. And what I have also been assured is looking at what else needs to be done. And this is one thing that I took away from Mayor Ireland, who's personally had to deal with the devastation of losing his own home, is the work that needs to be done. They have to do.
Minister, I'll have to cut you off because I've given you some time there. What needs to be done is we need to start clearing these trees, and we need to take action to prevent the fire from hitting Jasper and other towns in the Rocky Mountain National Park and our other national parks that are at risk. But I'll move on to my next question, Minister. You know, the way that you're speaking here at committee, I think it would be more appropriate if your ministry was the Ministry of Emergency Response, because I'm not seeing a lot of preparedness from your government. What role did you take in the years and the months leading up to this Jasper fire to prepare Jasper and other towns and national parks, which are under federal jurisdiction, for the threat of wildfires? You as Minister of Emergency Preparedness, what did you do?
So for our role in emergency preparedness, one of the things we do is look at on the prediction of where potentially fires can take place. We have made that information available as far as possible. The other aspect, one of the things we have prepared is making sure that evacuees need the support. That's one of the things that we also learned from last year, and the humanitarian workforce program played a very important role in that. When it comes to the preparedness side, that's a shared responsibility that happens with the provinces and the municipalities to be able to work together.
Thank you. I only have 30 seconds left, Minister. I have given you some good time to answer that. What day did Alberta make a request for assistance with Jasper? What day did the request for assistance come to you?
Well, the actual first request that was made was actually not for Jasper. We were actually.
I'm asking for the one for Jasper specifically, though, Minister.
But I need to, I'm trying to explain to you the actual how the situation took place. It wasn't just like a one moment then another. When I was on the phone with Minister Ellis throughout the day, we were actually looking at providing support for northern Alberta, while literally at the same time the situation in Jasper is deteriorating. So we didn't even look at where the resources were going. We were dealing with Jasper, and then the decision was made during my visit is to shift the resources, and that was their decision to make.
What day, Minister?
Thank you. Time's up. Time's up. I'm sorry.
22nd of July.
Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Van Koeverden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, officials, for joining us today. But more than just thank you for joining us today, thank you for your work over the course of this very, very challenging wildfire season in Alberta and right across Canada. You know, unlike the Conservatives, I want to commend you for your work and for the preparation that you undertook. That work saved lives. I want to be very clear. The work undertaken by nonpartisan officials, Parks Canada staff, firefighters, forestry workers, everybody that goes into those places to do that work, whether they were putting out a fire, creating an evacuation plan, talking to families, printing the literature that went door to door to make sure that families knew what the plan was, your work saved lives. I found over the last couple of meetings the over-politicization of this natural disaster to be disgusting. It's a natural disaster which is impacted by human events like climate change. In this case, it wasn't impacted by arson or by, I believe, we've heard that the wildfires were started by lightning, not by a campfire or something, a cigarette butt. But, you know, I've read what Mayor Ireland said, and Mayor Ireland said, you know, they're devastated. He's lost his childhood home, as you mentioned, Minister, of his whole life. But they can rebuild, and they'll recover. And Jasper will economically recover because it's a place where everybody wants to go. It's beautiful. We can't rebuild human lives. But the work that was undertaken by your colleagues, by the staffs, by Parks Canada, by the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, and everybody that focused on this problem, going years back, saved lives. So thank you. You know, a couple of years ago, we saw the same thing happen. We've been seeing the proliferation of wildfires, the lengthening of the seasons, the severity of the fires increasing because of climate change, because of drier forests, because of infestations, because of a lot of other factors. But we've also seen an over-politicization of these fires. And a couple of years ago, we saw Donald Trump blaming Governor Newsom for not clearing dead wood from the forest bed. And I've spent time in forests before. I know what a 30,000 hectare forest looks like. It's an enormous undertaking to suggest that any large group of individuals would go out into the forest and clear all that dead wood. Forest management is important, but blaming forest management for wildfires and for natural disasters in the face of a climate crisis is absurd. What's more absurd than that is when recently a Conservative member included the name of a nonpartisan official, this is somebody that works in this field professionally, in a tweet. And what happened subsequently is that professional Canadian dedicating their time in their career to keeping Canadians safe received death threats as a result of that tweet from a Conservative member. I'm not going to bring up names into this, it's not important, but that's what we get when we overly politicize natural disasters, when we take things out of context, when we try to score points off of people's lives, livelihoods, and homes that have been lost. And I want to call that out as being inappropriate, unacceptable, and disgusting. Minister, I find the over-politicization of this natural disaster to be troubling, and I commend you on your cross-partisan work with Minister Ellis in Alberta. I was actually in Algonquin Park thinking about how beautiful it was when I heard on the radio that you were in Edmonton working with Minister Ellis. So thank you very much for that. On behalf of Canadians who love the outdoors and on behalf of Jasperites, thank you for the work that you did that saved lives. Minister, what can we do? There was always more work to be done, like you said. What can we do more to prevent the over-proliferation of wildfires, that severity? What forest management techniques could be considered while we also undertake Canada's responsibility to mitigate climate change, because we have such a responsibility to do so?
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for the question. And one of the things in this portfolio especially, I make it a point, and any emergency that I've dealt with, conversation I have, we don't politicize. I work with many different provinces of various parties who are in government at this time, and we work on dealing with the issue. If there's concern, we deal with it directly, and have some very good relationships, and especially with Alberta, because at the end of the day, climate change is having an impact, whether you call it that or something else. Reality is the reality, right? It's going to hit. And we all do need to be prepared for it, and that's what we have been doing. I have to admit, based on what I have seen in Jasper, with what Parks Canada and all the experts on the ground, if you could be there for that briefing, right? All of them said that they've done everything in their power. Their Mother Nature could not have stopped what was coming.
Thank you
but
very
yes,
much.
there's work to be done all across the country.
On se tourne vers Madame Posé.
And now we'll turn to Ms. Posé, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. We are here for Bill C-76. We've talked a lot about prevention. Now, this Bill C-76, will it bring about more prevention, more precaution, and will it mitigate the effects of an eventual wildfire?
To that bill, more better than I can.
Donc, avec plus.
So there's transfer and delegation of powers to, for instance, the Jasper municipality. And there can be ability to put in place legislation that would govern, for example, the municipality.
And the mayor had used this yesterday. No cedar shakes on the roofs of homes in Jasper. Okay. So they could put in those sorts of things which would help, in fact, not have the spread within the new homes to other places.
OK. Donc, le projet de loi 76, c'est comme un outil.
Bill C-76 is like an additional tool. Now, geolocalization, that is a very powerful tool. So when you have specific data on weather or ground conditions, it could enable one to have a protocol for immediate action. Might that be something considered crucial in the event of fires? Yes, we are working with our colleagues to have that type of tool. At Environment Canada, for instance, they have a contract. I mean, there's satellites, and Canada needs to get all of the data it needs.
Meeting this week had a presentation on that very system.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. We have a number of initiatives. Environment Canada has installed a supercomputer sort of to do risk assessments. NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, of course, also has huge scientific arrays, satellite arrays that they focus on these issues, and we point out those high-risk areas. Those were all shared with the provinces starting in February and March of this year.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Okay. Madam Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to follow up on, the serious issues that I was raising. Putting aside the fact that Transport Canada failed to notify this community about a contaminated site, which it bears repeating that there is a children's playground close by, that the children are playing in that water. This is 7 years after Transport Canada was privy to the information. That they failed to disclose the findings of the reports included in the Millennium Study. One of the calls that the nations are asking for is to immediately present a plan and funding to allow for the water evacuation of Fort Chipewyan in the event of a natural disaster, a wildfire, while the remediation and repair work that needs to happen is undertaken to install a temporary dock. And I'm wondering if the minister can commit to do this for this community and make sure they are safe in the event of these kinds of wildfires.
What we'll do is definitely, now that we're made aware of this, we'll work with Indigenous Services to on how we can best help. Each community needs to take a look at how best to evacuate. This has been a concern for us. What we have been also doing is trying to determine and trying to predict if there was fires in certain areas where there was no road access, what resources what we would need, and then we'll add more resources. Derek, you want to add to that?
Yeah, there is
before you jump in, I just want to add that I sat down with leaders from this community not too long ago, and they talked about how they've already been evacuated, and they know that if the wind is blowing, air evacuation is not possible. And so, having water evacuation as a possibility is critical.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. Indigenous Services Canada spends an enormous amount of money and effort and time working with communities to support them in every way possible. So if there's an issue here, I'm sure they'll be looking at that, especially when it comes to egress and fires. There is a study underway with them that we are working on about high remote fly-in only communities to make sure they have multiple ways of getting out. And we had a significant evacuation of a First Nation in Bonabinibi, Manitoba this year, where we evacuated 2,700 First Nations with the CAF's help.
Maybe in my last 15 seconds or so, I just want to press upon the minister the importance of dealing with this issue of, talking to the Minister of Transport as well as the Minister of Environment to ensure that you address the environmental racism that has happened here.
Thank you. Mr. Calkins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. I just want to give you a heads up that I'm very familiar with Jasper National Park. So I'm going to be asking you some fairly specific questions. In your opening remarks, you said that there was, you left no stone unturned, the Government of Canada left no stone unturned when it came to preparing for the fire that happened that destroyed almost $1 billion worth of personal property, left a couple thousand people homeless, and actually resulted in the death of unfortunately, of a brave firefighter. I don't believe actually that that's statement that you made in your opening remarks is true.
Point of order.
Yes. Who called the point of order? Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yeah, Standing Order 18 on order and decorum does say that remarks which question the member's integrity, including a minister, are not allowed. And I think that what that member just said directly questioned the minister's integrity.
Okay.
Well, you know, I wouldn't be maybe as direct, Mr. Calkins, about that, but you can go continue.
I suppose in the quest for the truth then, Minister, I take umbrage with the comment that you made. The no stone unturned comment is frustrating for me because I am acutely aware of efforts that have been made, and you referred to private sector partners. Are you aware, Minister, that private sector partners were actually en route to Jasper and were actually turned away from coming to do fire suppression in the town of Jasper?
Well, first of all, to your accusation there is wrong because what I was talking about, no stone unturned. At that time, I was talking about the emergency preparedness for the overall country.
Well,
let's explore
Mr.
that. Chair, okay,
please,
I've been very polite until now.
Mr. Calkins, I think I'm interested to know what the minister's answer
So
is.
I'm trying to clarify if you're accusing me of something. What I was talking about is from previous wildfires, we've been working, trying to learn the lessons from there and trying to share those across the country. That's when it comes to no stone unturned, right? It's obviously impossible for us to look at every single community across the country. And when it comes to those resources, yes, I can assure you that that was not the case. I spoke directly with Minister Ellis about this, and that was not the case. When those concerns were actually raised, it was addressed on the ground during the actual visit itself. And all of us, and so the minister responsible for emergency preparedness, right, we were there when it said that this was not an actual issue. Any resources that were needed were made available and that were put to use by the incident commander as we were briefed.
Your comments also about saying that no fire team could have stopped it. If my allegation is actually true that fire suppression private sector partners were actually turned away en route to Jasper, how would you know if it wasn't, if these folks wouldn't have been able to stop it at all? They have a very clear track record. As a matter of fact, they're under contract with the province of Alberta. The province of Alberta would not have stopped this company from coming into Jasper. The fire started 4 days before it reached the town. It sat on somebody's desk because this company had years of negotiations with Parks Canada on fire suppression. They have mobile devices that can be deployed to this, and they have told me specifically that they were turned around. As a matter of fact, they show on the video the footage of the news where their fire suppression units were turned around. Minister, are you very sure in what you're telling me right now that no stone was left unturned and that nobody that could have prevented the fire in Jasper from destroying those buildings, nobody was turned away? Are you sure?
First of all, when it comes to the management of the fire, the incident commanders on the ground make the calls. And also, when I was with Minister Ellis, I think you also need to speak with Minister Ellis if you really want to be sure, because at the same time, he was also directly involved. So I would say that some of the accusations that you are making.
I used the word allegation,
sorry,
Minister.
my mistake.
If we're going to be nice to each other, it goes both ways.
My apologies. I take that back. No, that was looked at. That's one of the reasons why I actually went to Edmonton to work with Minister Ellis directly to making sure that if there were any confusion, it could be addressed.
What is it, Mr. Calkins?
No, I don't want to interrupt. I can do two things at once. I was listening to the minister. I was simply asking you how much time I have left.
Oh, okay, 45 seconds. Yeah.
One of the key things was we need to make sure that for example, what happens is there's a lot of requests that ends up coming. Incident commander on the ground is making decisions. What we needed to do is making sure that the Alberta Provincial Operations Center had the right people. We actually, time speaking with Parks Canada, inserted people in their operations center so that the appropriate people can make the appropriate decision based on the resources on the ground.
Minister, will you undertake to provide to this committee all documents pertaining to the procurement of equipment as well as contracts with private sector partners relating to the fire suppression and mitigation in Jasper National Park since 2017?
But that is, just to clarify here, the province is in charge of the management of the resources. We provide resources in addition to Parks Canada.
The government of Alberta does not
and then we also
parks.
provide. I'm just telling you what was taking place on the ground. and I'm sure Parks Canada can provide the appropriate information.
Will you undertake to make sure those documents are provided? to the committee?
I can't give you that because I am the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, right? I don't have the authority to provide any of those type of work. We can only provide based on what my responsibility is. So.
I would like to invite all members because we have learned that subsequent to certain actions by Conservatives, there have been death threats. I think it is up to every member here to protect all Canadians, and public servants are also Canadians, and many are in my riding. I think we all need to be very prudent when we tweet. I know that you like social media, but it's serious. It's a serious matter.
Some of the claim that we've heard in the House of Commons by Conservative that, fighting climate change is actually will do nothing to stop wildfires.
I would say if right now in our country and the rest of the world, climate change is having a devastating impact. We need to fight it. If the situation gets worse, our preparation, how do we end up keeping up with Mother Nature? We have a responsibility. It's going to be too late if we don't end up fighting climate change. And just look at the last 10 years. I mean, Canadians are seeing, towns that are being completely evacuated. Our towns are being burned. People are being devastated by this. We have to fight climate change. And if we don't do as much as we can, just imagine the pattern that we're seeing now getting worse. My worry is our resources, we will run out of resources. Then what will we do? And last year was a perfect example where, fortunately, we had a lot of international firefighters. We are adding more firefighters as needed. But in addition to wildfires, we're also dealing with now with not just regular floods with atmospheric rivers. One of the biggest one of the bigger concerns that I have right now is actually flash flooding because of the climate change. And to add, add even greater complexity to it? Places where there has been the ground has been burnt 4 or 5 feet deep into the ground. Now is that with additional rain, you got additional flood risk as well. So this whole situation is going to compound even further. So we do need to do our part to fight climate change. Otherwise, I'll be honest, it's let's put it this way: for anybody who's going to realize, it'll be by the time certain people realize, it's going to be too late.
On est peut-être la première génération à vivre.
We're probably the first generation to be living such severe climate change impacts, but might be the last generation to be able to do anything. I've listened to your colleague say it's the worst wildfire season, and you're already preparing for next year. It's very worrisome. I would like to come back to the town of Jasper. And what's next? There is a program, a financial assistance program in the event of disasters. Would the town be able to access that funding? Thanks to federal, provincial, municipal collaboration, lives were saved, but the town needs to be rebuilt. Would that funding program be available?
Why? And it will be working through the province for any resources. And we have provided the mayor and their team with staff that can provide additional information how the disaster financial assistance arrangement works. The province of Alberta already has a good track record on how to know how that's going to work. We had some discussions on this, and we'll provide any additional resources to making sure that they have the full breadth of the information on that.
OK. Mais juste confirmer, est-ce que...
I would like to confirm, has the request been received and has it been approved? The request for funding. How
it works, it's an ongoing process. We have received a letter and we'll be working with them, but absolutely Jasper does qualify for the disaster financial assistance arrangement.
Mm-hmm. Et combien ce programme coûte au gouvernement?
How much does this program cost the federal government?
It is quite extensive. So because of different disasters, We're up to about $7 billion right now already since its inception, but most of that has been paid out for the last 10 years. But having said this, just keep in mind all the different disasters that have taken place. In some cases, the advance payment has gone. Some of this work will take years, so the true cost has not even fully matured just yet. So it'll be much, much higher than $7 billion.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for being with us and answering questions and providing some clarity on what happened during that terrible disaster. I believe the officials will be staying with us for another hour to answer further questions. So we will continue with 2 more rounds. We'll be able to get in 2 more rounds. Again, Minister, thank you. Always nice to see you. And for the, well, what is actually the 3rd round? It's a 5-minute round. We're only doing 5-minute rounds. We have Mr. Leslie, who is, sorry, is that, yeah, okay. Actually, while we have a bit of a changeover here, of the schedule, on October 9th, we were planning on doing perhaps 2 hours on the Jasper National Park fires, but we only have 1 hour scheduled because we don't have enough witness suggestions. So we're missing witness suggestions from the Liberals and the Bloc, I believe. So if we don't get more witness suggestions, we'll do 1 hour on the Jasper fires on the 9th and 1 hour on the sustainable finance study. So, I would ask that any witness suggestions from the Bloc or Liberals arrive at the clerk's desk or email by 5 p.m. this Friday. Yeah. Okay. Madame Posey.
Oui. Bon,
Yes, thank you. Chair, you talked about the 9th. Now, I had written down the 7th, 2 hours on C-76, and on the 9th, there was 1 year on sustainable finance and 1 hour on C-76. Well, we're missing an hour. We wanted to do 6 hours. Well, 3 meetings, 6 hours in all. So we've done 1 hour, then 2 hours. 2 hours the 7th, 1 hour the 9th, and then it's over. Yes, indeed. That is what we had. I must have misread the calendar, and I apologize.
Le troisième tour, c'est Monsieur Leslie.
3rd round, Mr. Leslie. 5 minutes.
Chair, Mr. Campbell, I'd like to start with our conversation last week you had with my colleague regarding that email exchange with 2 of your employees where one said, and I quote, "At what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel planned prescribed burns in Western Canada? As more and more media articles raise public concern, public and political perception may become more important than actual prescription windows," end quote. Have you since reviewed the entirety of those email exchanges since we chatted last week? Okay. Now, you claimed that at the time that email exchange was regarding a debate between mechanical clearing and prescribed burns, but
Correct.
we have a copy of the ATIP here, multiple pages, and there is no evidence to back up that statement. There's no mention of mechanical. That was to me, a very misleading statement. So I'd offer you first the opportunity to clarify now that you have read that particular transcript that was publicly released by the Environment Minister's office and explain what that possibly meant.
So it means exactly what I said. There was a discussion between them on 2 different approaches, one being mechanical and the other being prescribed. Just, Mr. Leslie, if you could.
I'll go ahead.
So we had earlier in that day, or the day before, I need to, a meeting of my operations managers. And in that meeting of the operations managers, there was a discussion around the number of politicians at the local level, the number of articles across the country, and in every type of publication around the public saying that they were losing faith in people starting fires, prescribed burns. Just wait. So if we can finish, if I can finish though, on that, so that began the process. Then they had the discussion. I'll just ask you a
Please
question
wrap it
back,
up.
because the question
This is
might
not how
be
that
to
works.
me.
You do not ask me questions. I
I
ask you
think it was a
questions.
bit of, we're
Mr.
not.
Campbell, the evidence, okay, could you table the briefing, the minutes of that meeting, any
We don't
exchanges
take
on
minutes.
WhatsApp, Signal, any other platform that you use to try to
don't take
clarify
minutes.
the evidence? Because the
Point of order,
the ATIP that
Mr.
we
Chair.
got
Okay, we're gonna
does
just
not
pause
back
here
up
for a
when you are
second.
saying
Point of
in
order,
any way,
Mr.
shape, or
Chair.
form.
We're just going to pause. This is getting a little too,
minutes.
argumentative. Yes, Mr.
My point of order pertains to hostility, which leads to unsafe working conditions for both translators and officials, as we've seen. A literal death threat came to a Canadian official, a government official, who are nonpartisan workers, by the way.
But I think I'm right now.
Nobody here is on trial. The work of these individuals
I just
saved
want to
lives.
focus on the health of the interpreters, because when there's intense arguing like that, and they can't hear, they can't interpret, and
Precisely.
probably it's not great for their hearing. Ms. Collins, you have a point of order too?
Yeah, I just want to raise, I really don't want to see any badgering of witnesses, but I do think it is important to acknowledge that the time that we have to question is our time. And so if the witnesses could just maybe be reminded that when a member is interrupting, it's often because we have a limited amount of time. And so if you could just pause and let us to jump in to redirect, as it is our time to ask the question.
I would agree with you, Ms. Collins, but also I think the witness has to be given an opportunity to answer the question. But anyway, so why don't we try again? So I'll restart the clock. I don't know where we were. Was it Mr. Campbell who was answering, or Mr. Leslie that was asking?
Mr. Leslie can.
Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I'll pick up where I left off, because I'll get into the quotes from the ATIP that was released publicly by your department to the public. This is not some sort of nefarious thing that we've unleashed. It was publicly released under ATIP, under access to information, and it was regarding political purposes. But one participant in that debate disagreed, and they said, I quote, "I hope we don't get into a blanket shutdown. Prescribed burns are important for both ecological and risk reduction reasons." End quote. And it gets better. That employee said, "It is critical to continue those kinds of burns when Parks Canada falls behind. It is, quote, very difficult to catch up." So I'll ask a very straightforward question. Did you ever inform the minister that one of your employees, or perhaps a group of you in a closed-door meeting without minutes or notes, was contemplating ending prescribed burns due to political perceptions as per this ATIP?
Nope.
You did not inform the minister of that, so he had no chance of knowing that Parks Canada was unilaterally making these decisions.
So, again, a discussion. So it came up, and the question that I would love to answer is, did we cancel a single prescribed burn in that year? Because the answer is no.
Well, here's the question I'd like to ask then. Did you, in your view, do enough prescribed burns?
Okay, Mr. Campbell,
Est-ce que, appel au règlement.
Point of order. Please, would it be possible, through the chair, yes, chair, would it be possible for my colleague, Mr. Leslie, to take a deep breath and let the witness answer? Yes, the witness answered. So Mr. Leslie has the floor once again. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Well, I will take a deep breath. Thank you to my colleague across the way. And I'll ask for a yes or no answer. Do you think it's appropriate that Parks Canada considered giving greater weight to political perceptions as opposed to the proven science when it comes to protecting communities from devastating burns like we saw in Jasper?
No.
It is not appropriate that you are weighing political decisions? Is that an accurate assessment?
It is not appropriate that we would weigh a political decision more than science.
So why did you?
That's the question you asked.
Why did you?
We didn't, because we continued with all of the prescribed burns that we had planned.
Do you think
Full stop.
Did Parks Canada undertake an adequate number of prescribed burns, and in addition to mechanical removal of dead wood that for 8 years has been notified to the departments of Parks Canada that it is a huge problem, that it is a tinderbox waiting to explode? Yep. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Do you think, honestly, with a straight face, that Parks Canada did enough in the lead up to prevent this from happening?
So, did we take every prescribed burn in every year in every burn window that we had available to us since 2014? Absolutely.
Do you think it was enough?
Did we do mechanical removal to $6.4 million in and around the cut blocks around Jasper during the prior to 2024, yes, we did that. So your next question was, was it enough?
Yes.
So it's always hard to say, and I will say this, that it is ever enough. We do as much as we can in the control windows that you have. So there is.
Could you do more if you had more funding?
Okay, time's
Is there a
up.
lack
Time's
of funding
up. We'll go to
available
Mr.
this?
Ali.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. And I apologize the way you've been treated here by my colleagues. This is a committee. We ask questions, and you respond to those questions. And if you're not given an opportunity to respond to your questions, I don't think there's a point of asking questions. First of all, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to those questions if you have any question to respond by my colleague, so you can give your side of the story, please.
No, so I'm happy with the responses that I gave to Mr. Leslie. I'll turn it, though, to my colleague, Ms. Upton, to further elaborate.
Yeah, I can just give a few statistics. So, I have a list of over 14 projects from 2018 in Jasper related to mechanical tree removal, as well as prescribed burns that have been going on. We do on average about 12, 13 prescribed burns a year. In Parks Canada, we plan for those. We have a directive. Each site has fire management plans, outlines their prevention and fire reduction strategies. That includes prescribed burns. Those are planned for annually at the local level with support from the national level. And we take every opportunity we can. Prescribed fires, however, are dependent on particular conditions, like prescriptions to be correct in order to light those fires. And that has become more challenging recently with the fire season starting longer and starting earlier and going longer. And prescribed fires take place in the spring and the fall. But we have invested a lot of money, and we've had an additional $52 million over 5 years to help us continue to do more work on the prevention as well as the suppression side. Thanks.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, how did the lesson learned process from the 2023 wildfire season aid in the preparation and mitigation measures for this wildfire season? Anyone can.
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate. So last year, as everyone recalls, was the single worst fire season in Canadian history by any number of measures. Smoke, there were 200,000 folks evacuated. We had 15 million hectares burned. We had 5,000 international firefighters arrive to help us. So last year, obviously, was very significant. The implications of that for a repeat this year were not lost on anyone. Our colleagues in Environment Canada and NRCan predicted, unfortunately, that the drought conditions that we're seeing in the West, pervasive drought, pervasive heat, were going to continue this year, and the only variables that can change is the amount of precipitation you get. So very late in the season last year, when the fires started to die down, which was October, which is extremely unusual, and as you recall, there were 100 fires that continued burning underground under snow that we call zombie fires in BC and Northwest Territories. So we took lessons learned, started very early last fall. It was a national consultation, talked to every province, to CIFC, NRCan, Indigenous groups, and we came up with a series of lessons learned that we presented to the government in the fall. We also then accelerated everything we do in terms of preparation for this year. Normally, we go to Cabinet in May with a risk assessment that's provided by the best available science federally and provincially. That happened, I believe, in March of this year. So it was to bring that science up 3 months is a very difficult thing to do, and we did that. We engaged every province. We know that CIFC and others looked for international assistance much earlier than normal. Yeah.
I have a couple more questions, and I wanted to ask that the people who are making decisions on fire suppression, do they live in that community, and would they be affected by the wildfires?
If you're talking about Jasper, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So the person responsible for wildfire management, the person responsible for vegetation reduction, the person responsible for the program of fire smarting, all live in the town.
So,
two of those individuals lost their home. I have a hard time imagining the motivation of anybody not to do everything possible when you live in a town, your family lives in a town, your life is in that town, not to do everything possible in order to protect your town.
Thank you. We'll go now to Madame Posey.
Pour combien de temps, Monsieur le Président?
How much time do I have? 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Clearly, with this growing threat of forest fires, it takes a huge number of people, many experts, lots of knowledge around the table. We've talked about trees. We've talked about prescribed burns. Now, I'd like to hear you on structures. You've talked about people losing their homes. So there's homes, equipment, systems, protocols, all of this. Is there some kind of task force for people to come together to discuss these things? Because these concerns are important and impacts affecting insurance, private structures, public structures, everything's at risk. Now, are there any plans for instituting some kind of round table where you can bring everyone together and talk about requirements such as distances or urban and semi-urban protection systems? Thank you.
Thanks very much for the question. Merci pour la question. C'est très important.
It is indeed important. There is, in fact, a committee.
Representatives, the province, and also the municipality. And it's set up to govern, really, now that we're out of the response into the recovery, and to deal with all the issues that you just mentioned in terms of the recovery aspects, whether it is to build back better the structures, it is to discuss issues around assistance. So with respect to the federal government and Public Safety Canada, it was mentioned earlier about the disaster financial assistance arrangements. Those discussions are taking place there. So there is, I want to assure you that there is a governance structure that has been formally set up, and discussions are taking place around all the issues of recovery that are going on there. So again, it's ongoing. It's early days as we move into the recovery in Jasper.
Well, that's precisely it. Everywhere is the same. There are complaints that we tend to work in silos. I think it is high time to bring people together around the same table and discuss the better ways of doing things. Thank you. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, thanks to the officials for being here. I am thinking about the people who were evacuated, thinking about what it must have been like to have to flee and then return to their community devastated by the wildfires. And I think we all need to come together to support the town of Jasper and the rebuilding process. And I'm curious, can you talk a little bit more about in the rebuilding of the town of Jasper, the consideration of the option of a fire break buffer zone, the space between the forest and the town?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. So there already is a very large and significant fire break around the town of Jasper. Much like there are large blocks, and in fact the blocks are growing, and we're needing to have those blocks grow around the town of Banff as well, and a fire break in between Banff and Lake Louise. So we are in the Mountain Park area, and certainly all across the country, as Ms. Upton had noted, we are making larger blocks. We are doing more prescribed burns and more mechanical removal all across the country because of exactly what you had said.
Thanks. Now, we know that the poor air quality from smoke of wildfires hits the most vulnerable the hardest. Oftentimes, seniors, children, pregnant people, people who are working outdoors. Smoke from larger and more frequent wildfires is having an impact on asthma, cancer, mental health. And so I'm curious in your emergency preparedness and also disaster management, if you're connecting with kind of the after impacts, both the post-traumatic stress, but then also the clear impacts on health and well-being.
Thanks for the question, Chair. Yes, we are. It's of grave concern to us, the impacts upon people that have been impacted by emergencies. We are doing a lot of work in terms of post-traumatic stress. We have some programs, I can turn to that in a second. With respect to the smoke, we're connected with our colleagues in the health portfolio to talk about the impacts. We have data and information that is produced when there are wildfires in terms of the smoke, just how bad it is. Some of the impacts for smoke are also kind of communicated to the general public in terms of health messaging. We know it's an issue and has to be addressed. So just to assure the member chair, yes, we are connected to the public health portfolio as part of our regular meetings in terms of managing emergencies.
Mr. Calkins.
So my question will be for Parks Canada. My colleague, Mr. Leslie, was just asking about the emails, and we had a conversation about this last week. If what you're saying is true, Mr. Campbell, why is there no record of any discussion of mechanical removal of trees in any of that information that this committee or that we've received through the Access to Information request? It would only seem reasonable to me, because I'm a former Parks Canada, Alberta Parks. I've worked for the public service most of my life prior to becoming a member of Parliament. I know exactly how these conversations go. If what you're saying is true, then it should be clearly outlined in a document. Why is it not in the document? If you say that it's about mechanical removal, there is nothing here that suggests to me that any conversation at all was happening about mechanical removal.
So I guess you'll have to look at what was in discussion at that time at Parks Canada. And I think if you look, we always have a number of different techniques that we will employ. And that's what, in fact, so what you read in the second email, or what Mr. Leslie read in the second email, was from the head of the fire group, Tamini Snaith. And at that time, Dr. Snaith had said that, in fact, we wouldn't be looking at that. And so, for Darlene and myself,
I want to hone in on one part of that conversation.
Yep.
And the sentence is really, really important because we were just talking about fire breaks. It's critical to continue those kinds of burns. It is how they maintain the community fire break. When they fall behind, it's very difficult to catch up.
So it is one of the methods of the fire break, community fire break. I think we can all agree mechanical is also another method for creating fire breaks. So what Dr. Snaith was saying was that we were still going to move ahead, and that was the advice that came up to Darlene and myself, that we would continue, and that is what we agreed to, is that we would continue to do that. Now, just if I can just, for 1 second, just give one slight piece of context. Is the individual that sent that, just to come back to another MP's question, was somebody who had been evacuated for 4 weeks the year before, had just gone through a town council meeting with Fort Smith, and where, at the meeting, they questioned whether we should still be doing prescribed burns. So that's the political pressure he is discussing.
But the reality is we've got $1 billion worth of assets burnt in town. The fire breaks did not work. prescribed burn conversation is very clear that there was political considerations and factors involved.
So can I just,
let me, I haven't even asked my question yet, Mr. Campbell. So, I mentioned this earlier when Minister Guilbeault was before here. The Excelsior fire, had the wind blown the other way, it would have come right down the Moline Valley, and you would have had this problem 10 years earlier. The pine beetle infestation is leaving most of that, virtually every pine tree in Jasper National Park is standing dead dry firewood. It burns fiery hot. To say that you've never seen or couldn't expect a fire of this magnitude, when somebody says that, I call BS. That's simply not true. You ought to know. Everybody knows. The people that live there know. People who live in the woods know. People who start campfires know that a dry, standing, dead tree is exactly what you go and look for. And to suggest and to hear people say that we've never seen trees blow down in a national park before, that's simply not true. I've rode my horse through the North Boundary Trail in Jasper National Park.
Can I stop?
Point of order. When you use rather vulgar words, the interpretation is not easy. Go ahead, Mr. Calkin.
It's simply not true. I was a North Boundary warden in Jasper in 1995. I rode through the Wellborn blowdown. Swaths of trees all blown down in the same direction. Winds go through the mountain parks. They howl through the mountain parks. They howl through the mountain valleys. So to suggest that you don't know that the wind is going to push the fire is simply not true. And I've got several examples of private sector companies that have been in discussions and could have provided relief to the town, and they were ordered, either turned around or ordered to leave town instead of providing fire protection. So I want to know, Mr. Campbell, if you will, I asked the previous minister if he was going to be able to do this, but will you undertake to provide to this committee all documents pertaining to the procurement of equipment, private contractors, as well as anybody involved in fire suppression planning for Jasper National Park since 2017, and will you provide it to this committee within the next 2 weeks?
We're way over time. We'll go to Mr. Longfield. Maybe Mr. Longfield will ask Mr. Campbell to continue on that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you to the witnesses for stepping into the political arena here and trying to help us with our jobs, which is a job of governance, of making sure questions are being asked. We're not the professionals that know whether mechanical burns or mechanical removal or burns are the best decision of the day. We employ people to make those decisions based on their expertise. So us saying that we're experts, we're not experts. I've done a lot of canoeing and I've got lost a few times. I've missed a few portages. I know there's a lot of dry wood in any bush that I've ever been lost in. It reminds me of the conversations in the United States when Donald Trump was president, saying in Finland they go in with rakes and they just take they go in with rakes. And I'm trying to picture somebody with a rake trying to solve the problem. I think that's the problem when we politicize discussions like this, is that non-experts are providing what they believe are expert opinions. So thank you for your expert opinions. I want to talk about, I mentioned Finland. Somehow other countries are also fighting the same challenges with the climate crisis, but they still provide firefighters to Canada. Could you maybe describe what that process looks like? How do other countries pitch in? How does Canada pitch in when needed?
Go ahead.
I'll just start maybe.
Okay, Ms. Upton.
On CIFC. So the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, which Parks Canada is a member of, is the coordinating body. They have three main goals: resource sharing, mutual aid, and info sharing. And we have a mutual aid resource sharing MARS agreement with them, and they provide equipment, personnel, and aircraft. That is very well coordinated in Canada. We also, Parks Canada, have agreements with Australia, the United States, and others for forest resources. So Parks Canada's forest firefighters have gone out and led firefighting incidents in the States and in Australia. So there's a great deal of coordination within Canada for all these resources. They operate seamlessly. We all use a similar command system, so we speak the same language when it comes to an incident. And I'll stop there and allow my colleagues to add a little to it.
I think you covered it.
I have one or two more questions, please.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please provide your details. That would be great.
Sure. Absolutely right. My colleague is spot on here. And last year, as I said, we brought in about 5,500 international firefighters. Some of those were from countries that have never come here before, including South Korea, France, Spain, Portugal, and others. So those NRCan funds helped partially fund CIFC, which is made up of a consortium of all the provinces. And CIFC is a jewel in the crown here of forest firefighting in this country. It's a very small but powerful organization, huge partners to us.
Could I just dwell on that for 2 minutes? I don't have 2 minutes, I have 1 minute. The mining sector in Canada is globally recognized as a center of excellence. We provide mining expertise around the world. Mining crews from around the world also come to Canada to provide their expertise. I think forestry, when you look at Canada, countries like Finland, countries with lots of forests, are naturally going to be in the lead role. How does Canada stack up globally in terms of our forest management and our governance over forest management? Mr. Sheehan, maybe?
Yeah, I'll just share from my perspective, being a member of a community of national parks internationally, and was actually in Finland this year. Listen, we can always learn from each other, but Canada is looked to for its expertise. It's why we're able to seamlessly send resources to other countries and participate. But our forest management, our planning is looked to from a national parks perspective. Certainly, but we also look to learn from others as well.
So rather than blaming you, I want to be supporting you, and I appreciate the support you're giving us. I hope we can give you some in return.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. We'll go to a final round. We'll make it a 4-minute round. So we'll start with Mr. Calkins.
Mr. Leslie.
Sorry, Mr. Leslie. Okay, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to continue on a couple of topics that we touched on. Firstly, my colleague, Mr. Calkins here, Mr. Campbell, it was asked about you, both private firefighting services and whether or not they were allowed, more or less, to enter. And so I will be tabling another witness because we have received some really interesting information from the president of the Arctic Fire Safety Services, which I hopefully you were engaged with, because there are some incredible accusations regarding Parks Canada's denial of their ability to enter the premise, particularly Park Warden Scott Murphy from Parks Canada, preventing them and suggesting that they would be escorted out or arrested if they were coming into work. So firstly, are you familiar with this company at all?
Absolutely not.
Okay, I look forward to having him join us as a witness so we can hear a little bit more about that. But going back to some of these emails that you are so firmly confident you're either out of context or you can't provide any other context to them, would you be willing to table any conversations written down in any way that do back up the claim that of what happened behind this closed-door meeting? Could you table something that would alleviate my concern that this was, in fact, about political pressure, not about a debate of mechanical use or prescribed burns? Is there anything you could provide me to ease my mind?
I don't know what could ease your mind, and we do not take notes at my operations team meeting. Full stop. I couldn't provide it for any meeting. We have one today. I have no notes.
Interesting. Before a prescribed burn is carried out, who has the sign-off? You mentioned the numbers. Who actually signs off on that at the ground level, and what is the time frame in that sign-off?
So there's prescriptions are written for prescribed burns. So there's the planning at the beginning of the year. Then there's the actual planning that kind of happens, and there's a sign-off. But the day of, it's signed off locally based on the local factors, just to ensure that all the conditions are met for the prescribed burn. So it's signed off very soon before it's actually undertaken.
Since Minister Guilbeault has been appointed, are you aware of any times that he's asked specifically to understand the use of prescribed burns in Jasper and or any other national parks? Or has he been directly briefed on the repeated warnings since 2017 on the tinderbox waiting to burn? Has he been directly briefed, or is this documents that has made it to his office? Does he have deniability that he's seen them, or has he actually been directly briefed?
During the fire season, the minister's staff are briefed regularly on the status, I assume.
But they were aware of the repeated warnings of the tinderbox that was the Deadwood in Jasper National Park.
I can't speak to that.
So you don't think that was worthy of the minister's awareness?
That situation is replicable in a lot of places in Canada. It's
Okay, I'm going to change directions here. There was a Blackhawks article that came out in August where the department refused to provide a piece of information that I'm hoping can be tabled whether through Parks Canada and or ECCC, and that relates to how many hectares of dead pine are now left standing in Jasper National Park. I understand that there was small amounts of prescribed burns that have 1,700 acres, some mechanical removals, a hectare, sorry, 2.5, right? I'd like to know how much is left now. I'm sure we have the technology to do a reasonable assessment. I don't need a specific number, but you wouldn't release that to the media in August. Will you table it with the committee so we can have a real understanding? Our emergency response minister, instead of preparedness, should probably be aware of how much deadwood still exists. Is that information that you can share with this committee within the next week?
Yeah, 15 seconds. I'm really going to run the clock tight right now, but.
I'm not sure if we have what you ask in that time frame.
That seems like a problem to me.
No.
That's not a problem?
No.
Interesting. Yeah, okay. Ms. Taylor-Roy, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Campbell, we spoke earlier about the people who are on the ground in Jasper. And I want to go back. There have been allegations, insinuations that not enough was done to prepare and to deal with this fire. Yet I've heard from yourselves and from the ministers that there was incredible collaboration between all levels of government, and the people on the ground were working really well together. I'm just wondering, do you feel there was any lack of cooperation or collaboration, or do you have the same impression that everyone on the ground was working jointly together for the same goal?
Yeah, we had an excellent collaboration on the ground.
Okay. And is there anything that you think, learning from this experience, that you would have changed about the way that it was handled? I know you have the incident commander, and you had a lot of different parties working together under his command or her command. Is there anything there that you would have changed?
So we've done the initial sort of view of what has gone on, but we are going to do a deep dive with our colleagues within the Government Operations Center on what we can learn. There's always things to learn out of every situation. We would be foolish to say there was nothing to learn or nothing to do better. Okay. And so we always do a post-review to learn to do better.
Great. Thank you. That's important. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think all the prep and everything we do is based on the norms and the science and the data. And what this fire's shown us is there's things happening that are completely outside of the norm. So there's researchers now studying fire tornado. It's only been documented once. They believe it happened in Jasper. Will that in the future change how we prepare? Potentially. Mm-hmm. But these are new phenomena that we don't know a lot about. So we can only prepare based on the best available data and looking at really where the values are at risk are. There is dead wood in forests around the world. We can't clear it all. So we're focused on priority areas and risks.
Great. Thank you very much. And just I was wondering, with the people on the ground in Jasper who work, the experts there, the people who are managing forest fires, again, we've heard comments about, combating climate change isn't working. There's still forest fires. What is the general feeling about people in Jasper or the people who work in this area? Do they believe that fighting climate change is necessary to actually curb further I guess, whether it's the fire tornadoes or cyclones or whatever you want to call it, do they believe that the action the government is taking to fight climate change is necessary to help them?
I think it's hard to say what people believe and answer that question. So I think, folks on the ground are noting, the incident commander noted, in his experience, which is vast, things are different. Things are more intense. The seasons are longer. So the evidence that we're seeing on the ground is that things are changing, and they're changing rapidly.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Madame Posé pour 2 minutes.
Thank you. We've talked about forest fires, we've talked about structures, and now I'd like to ask questions about insects. In the documentation we got information about the infestation of the mountain pine beetle. They infest the tree. Now that's part of climate change, more fires, and of course more insects. So there's a huge amount of change in terms of climate, in terms of biodiversity, and we are in reaction mode. So with regard to this mountain pine beetle, to what extent that trees are infested, are there, impacts on the extent of the wildfires in Jasper?
The mountain pine beetle in Jasper, we've been working since 1985 on managing that.
Okay.
Ça marche? Okay. We've been working on managing the impacts of that species. In 2016, a mountain pine beetle management plan was created for Jasper in collaboration with Canadian Forest Service and Alberta Agriculture. We received funding, $6.9 million, that allowed us to start to implement some of the actions in that plan. And so a lot of the fire break, and again, the actions are focused where the greatest values are at risk. So a lot of that work was focused around the town site to build the breaks and clear the forest.
J'aimerais, avant que mon temps finisse,
Before my time is up, there's research done, certainly since 2016. What is the research showing on the impacts of climate change on the infestation caused by these beetles? Time is up, unfortunately. I'm sure there is an impact caused by these infestations. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We know that Indigenous people are disproportionately impacted by wildfires. Indigenous people make up, I think it's less than 6% of the population, but more than 42% of wildfire evacuations have been from majority Indigenous communities. These communities have also been leading on solutions. Jasper is on Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 territories. The lands have been used as a meeting ground and traveling routes for many nations and have been home to nations since time immemorial. According to the municipality of Jasper, over 26 Indigenous partners are connected to the area presently. Indigenous communities in Canada, many have used controlled fire as traditional land management practice. Supporting these cultural burning practices can help reduce the risk of out-of-control wildfires. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of Indigenous guardians in managing wildfires in Jasper?
In Jasper specifically, there is not an Indigenous Guardians program that is doing part of the control burn.
And can you tell us, is there a plan to look into incorporating some of the nations who are connected to this land, or are there lessons learned from neighboring regions about how this could help improve our management of wildfires?
So we've recently brought in an Indigenous fire specialist within Parks Canada who's helping sort of take a look at the program through that lens. There are places where cultural burns are happening, which are quite different than prescribed burns. They're actually very different. But we are, consulting and have an expert who will help us sort of look at Indigenous practices and how we can incorporate some of that into our fire management program.
Thank you.
Is it Mr. for Jasper?
Yeah. Sorry, quick answer. What's the question?
It's national, so it will.
Okay, national.
Yeah.
Okay, is it Mr. Leslie for 4 minutes? Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, I would just like to pick up on the last question I had there regarding an assessment of the remaining deadwood. Would Parks Canada, are you planning to undertake that assessment?
Yeah, thanks for going back to that question. So yes, and we manage a lot of land. So we do fire management planning for all the sites that have fire risk. And the focus of some of the more detailed work is in the areas of where our high values are. So we're very focused on values at risk, and that informs the planning and informs where we invest in prescribed burns, mechanical, and just the planning in general.
So how long, and Mr. Campbell, can I get you to commit that once this is completed, how long will it take for this assessment to be completed, and can this committee have that assessment table to understand the risk of deadwood remaining after this tragedy?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, sorry.
How long will the assessment take, and when can this committee expect to receive a tabling of that information so we can understand the risk? From the Northwest, as my colleague that represents that region pointed out, that there is still a severe risk to the area, and I understand that there needs to be a fulsome assessment done. How long will that take, and when can the committee receive that information?
Yeah, I can't answer that question at the moment. But
okay, I'll pivot then. Mr.
Sorry,
Campbell?
if I can, though, I think we would be more than happy to give the Jasper Fire Plan and the fire prevention plan that we have for Jasper and the resources.
I'd like to know specifically about the deadwood.
It's online.
I appreciate that you can point me to a website.
Yep.
I'm going to pivot a little bit here. Going back to what I mentioned about the private security, I understand that you are not familiar with the specific company, Arctic Fire Safety Services, but reading through this email, it is pretty remarkable that there's 20 fire trucks and 50 firefighters that were denied entry. Will you commit to doing a full investigation of how on earth, when resources are being deployed with all of the equipment necessary to help suppress a major fire catastrophe, why that would happen and what operations need to change within Parks Canada to prevent them from being denied entry into the park?
I could say two things on that, and I don't have knowledge of the situation, but resource requests come via CIFC. We work with them because there's protocols and controls on that. And there's also time element potentially to this. I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like they were delayed about 3 days getting entry. My question is, will there be an investigation so we can better understand, and we report that information back to this committee so we can better understand how that could happen and how it could be prevented, lessons learned for the future?
There is always lessons learned and after action reviews on any major fires that we have. So there absolutely will be something, and we will look to learn lessons on that, and we can take a look at what that situation was.
Okay, because in my view, people have talked about our great public officials doing great work. The people on the ground that were fighting that fire are the heroes. That was an incredibly, hearing those stories from on the ground through Gawk, things like that, it was a devastatingly difficult fire. My point, I think our point, is that it didn't need to be that devastating. The real hero is Morgan Kitchen, who lost his life fighting that fire. These are the real heroes on the ground, and we should all have the utmost respect for the work they are doing. We had the Minister of Emergency Preparedness come here and tell us about emergency response. They need to change the name of that department if they are going to truly become preparing for emergencies. It was extremely disappointing. My entire concern is with Parks Canada having the lack of humility to say, maybe we could have done a little bit better. Maybe we could have prevented the high level of heat burning through that forest. And just admitting that we can do better, although politically not a great attribute of the current government, I expect that our officials can say, you know what, not just lessons learned, have a little humility and say we could have done better, and just take a little bit of responsibility.
We'll go to Mr. Vancouver, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and once again, thank you to the officials who have spent the last couple of hours here, and to our collective dismay on this side at least. This issue continues to be politicized. And I just want to say that I don't believe natural disasters and wildfires are a political issue. I think they need to be managed and dealt with by government officials, and that's a completely nonpartisan thing. Nobody, no politician, regardless of their party or background or region, believes that we shouldn't do more to prevent these natural disasters. More to respond to these natural disasters. We shouldn't invest more money in wildfire services. But I think it's worth pointing out that those institutions, Parks Canada, National Wildfire Services through Parks Canada, Climate change mitigation efforts were all starved by the federal government under Prime Minister Harper. And, you know, we've invested billions of dollars into measures to ensure that Canada's more resilient to climate change, to ensure that we do save lives and prevent these horrible catastrophes from impacting human life. So my question is simple. I would like to know, you know, I appreciate Mr. Leslie referring to the firefighters as heroes, because I completely agree. But they're hometown heroes, because people in Alberta who were fighting those fires were doing that in their own backyard. People that manage the forests were doing that in their own backyard. They were cleaning up and preventing the loss of life in their own communities. And I know this has been a really, really difficult and devastating time for folks. And to make matters worse, you know, now we're politicizing it. Or at least the Conservatives are politicizing it and making it seem as though, obviously in retrospect, like there's always an opportunity to reflect and say, hey, you know, there's things we could have done a little bit better. But I do want to once again commend you on your work and ensure that Canadians are aware of how prepared Jasper was, how prepared Parks Canada always is in the face of these types of you know, disasters, to respond quickly, to respond efficiently and effectively. But you know, I think we're probably towards the end of this meeting, and I would love to hear, you know, from you about anybody that you've discussed this with who's been personally impacted. You know, whether that's one of the officials or the firefighters or any of the families that have been impacted, and what they would like to see. So I'm asking in good faith for you to amplify the voice of somebody on the ground who's been impacted, because frankly I've had enough of this overly politicized perspective. What I'd like to know is, what does a Jasperite want us to do next?
45 seconds, please.
So you know, I have staff meetings with the 500 employees we have on the ground there. It's devastating to see 200 of them that have lost their homes. It's devastating to talk to them. It's devastating that they were the ones that were helping get everybody else out. They were the ones fighting the fire. They were the ones running the incident command center. They were the ones providing meals. They were the ones making sure that people got in. And so I think the thing that they are looking for, and certainly our employees are looking for, is there and will there continue to be a Jasper that they can call home into the future? And they are resilient for that, and they are looking forward to everything that we can do to help them do that, which is why the piece of legislation that is before you is important, because it provides a North Star for how the rebuild will happen.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. And if I could just ask for a brief indulgence, I would like to simply ask the committee for unanimous consent for you, next time you meet with the 500 staff in Jasper, next time you communicate to them, that you express both our gratitude and our sympathy for what they've gone through in the last year. Thank you.
Is there unanimous consent?
From the Environment Committee, Standing Committee on the Environment.
Is there unanimous consent to Mr. Van Koeverden's request? I think so. Okay, a meeting adjourned. Thank you, witnesses. Thank you for being here, for not only today, but before. Yeah.
I don't want to be long here, but I appreciate that we got clarification from the clerk regarding the previous motion from the spring regarding the redacted and unredacted documents for the Accelerator Fund. We have times available. I have not yet made it over there. But I would like to clarify, the language of it didn't seem clear to me if in fact there were two versions. And looking back at the motion that we passed at that time, it was very clear that the committee had passed a motion asking for complete and unredacted signed contributions and fully unredacted, as well as a private public version redacted. I guess my question to the chair is, if you know, and if
motion
you get
to
guidance
adjourn.
from...
Sorry, I can't, please.
If we can get clarity, has in your view, Mr. Chair, the motion been honored by Industry Canada as passed by this committee?
It's a complicated question. We can, it's a complicated question. I haven't seen the documents. But,
could
I'm
we-
going to adjourn and we can discuss this maybe on the sidelines.
I would like it, can we have it in public next meeting then?
You know, let me look. I'm going to have to speak to the clerk about the documents. I haven't seen it. So for now, I'm going to adjourn. Thank you.